Could you draw that connection, actually? So 1812, you said the Rothschilds took possession of the Bank of England. Interesting story there. I know there was deception involved without the outcome of the war, some information arbitrage. And then you said 1941, which is
drawing us into the war.
So can you connect those dots? How 1812 connects to 1941, and what is it about 1941 that we went from pure military industrial complex to corrupted, I think you said, military industrial complex?
Well, what happens in 1812, I think everybody knows about the Battle of Waterloo. This is when Nathan Rothschild uses his gold smugglers on the Silk Road, gets the information that Britain actually won. He does not let anybody else know in the London Stock Exchange, goes in there with a sad face, sells all the king's bonds, and everybody sees that, and then they magically induce panic selling, and then about an hour before the close, the Rothschilds come in and buy everything for pennies on the dollar, and according to what history tells us, if you can believe it, $600 million is the haul, which back then is, billions and billions, maybe even trillions of dollars today. So that makes the king extremely happy. So what happens at that point? That's when the Rothschilds and the king truly become one.
Right.
Okay. And what happens fast forward, you have to know a little bit of history about World War I to get to 1941. 1911, when we get the Federal Reserve Act, we get Woodrow Wilson. This is when we have corrupt politicians in the United States working with the Senate to give banking families control over our money. Very similar to what happened in 1812. That's the creature Jekyll Island. I don't think anybody who'll watch this podcast will ever have to have that story, reviewed for them. You can read the book if you're a Bitcoiner, you know it.
It talked about it a lot.
Right. So the big issue happens from them is that the Treaty of Versailles has, how shall we say, poison pills built into it to guarantee that we get to a second world war. Who doesn't know that? Is the industrial military complex. Who are the people that crafted that? Those are the people that are in the Pilgrim Society. Those are the people, Council of Foreign Relations. That's the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the Harrimans, all the people that we know are involved with the formation of the Fed. Turns out that the royal family actually manufactures the Nazi regime, shares that information with the King of Spain, shares that information with other people. One of those people happens to be Alan Turing. And that information gets sent through the Enigma machine. You and I both learned when we were young men that Alan Turing was a hero. But you know how Alan Turing was taken out, right?
He was poisoned, I think?
Yeah, by an apple.
Yeah.
And with cyanide. That's actually how Steve Jobs got the name of this company right here.
Now the apple that killed Alan Turing.
You got it. But it turns out, don't you think that's a little bit of an interesting story that you would go and kill a guy? Why? Because he was found sodomizing, someone who is okay with it because he was gay. You would kill a guy that solved the German codes? No, it was exactly the same story as a patsy with Lee Harvey Oswald. So the whole key to understanding this story is recapturing a loyal title from the United States and Russia. Why? Because in World War I, you lose a loyal title because of the Romanovs.
Yeah. A loyal title being that ancient ideal in inviolate private property, right?
Something right, there's nobody superior, right?
Yes.
But I would tell you, I wouldn't characterize it as you just said. I would say Bitcoin right now is a loyal title for the common man.
Yes.
Today.
That's, I call it inviolate private property from the Magna Carta.
Correct.
It's the same thing, right? It's like you own it free and clear, no superior claims, no liabilities built into it. It's just yours.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the United States was lost in 1776. And Russia was lost in 1918. The whole goal of the period from...
When you say lost, sorry, who is that? Who's losing the loyal title in those instances?
The royal family.
The royal family.
Remember, the Romanovs were cousins. Remember, you have to understand a little bit about history.
I don't know a lot about this history, right?
All right,
so you have to handhold me through it.
World War I, you basically have fights between the cousins. That's Wilhelm in Germany, King George in England, and then Nicholas in Russia. Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901 tried to stave off this war, by intermarrying the royal family everywhere in Europe. What did she create? Hemophilia in a lot of the royal family. That's what the Romanovs had. But she was unsuccessful in stopping the war. World War I effectively was a squabble between the royal families in Europe. Okay. So as this ends, in the middle of World War I, we have the Bolshevik Revolution. This actually occurs in 1917. World War II doesn't end to 1918. Who set this whole process up? Again, it's the Rothschilds working with King George. And they go to the three leaders of the USSR, which is Trotsky, Stalin, and Lenin, and say, look, because of these problems going on in Russia, we would just like you to take our cousin, lock him up in Siberia, and we'll figure all of this out at the end of the war, because the war was coming to a close. Stalin and Lenin held true to that. Guess who didn't? Trotsky. Trotsky being a Russian Jew who knew that the Rothschilds were doing some nefarious things. He also came from a very wealthy family. He made the decision unilaterally to kill all the Romanovs. So when that happens, Russia goes from control of the family of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is the royal family prior to Windsor, and then becomes the USSR under Stalin and Lenin. Okay. So,
and they wiped out that entire family, right?
Everybody, including the children.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's known to history. Why does this play a huge role in World War II? Because the meetings that the big three have, first in 42 at Tehran, Iran, then at Yalta, and then at Potsdam. You probably remember learning a little bit about these stories, but what happened in those stories, that's when actually Stalin tells FDR that how you view your history is not how I view the history. He goes, I understand that you think I'm the bad guy, but I will tell you in 1940, remember this is before our 1941 story, because I sent my guys from Russia in the KGB to kill Trotsky in Mexico City. And he goes, I did it because I was trying to avoid this huge problem in World War II. So this is how these two things come together.
Sure.
But Robert, if you go to any place in Miami right now where you live, you will never find this story in an American history book. In other words, it's like AI. It's been magically wiped free of the books. And to this very day, the one thing that I think you and I both can agree on, that since that time, the United States military and politicians have always used Russia to replace the bad guy. Who is the PSYOPs bad guy? Hitler. So Russia's become the bad guy. And if you know the history of how the UN was begun, how it started, you will actually see how this gets to my next point, is the two most important speeches that a president has ever given in the United States is Eisenhower's farewell speech, which stunned everybody in America. You may not have had the stun that I did because I was alive at the time, but that speech basically said our biggest enemy isn't anybody else but our own industrial military complex.
I remember that, yeah.
Well, everybody in
the term was coined, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
And when you actually hear that as an American, that should make you stand up and go, that's not what I've been told.
Yeah.
But yet that's still on YouTube to this very day.
Yeah.
And then the second big one happens in 1960 when Kennedy is running for president. He gives a speech at American University and thanks the Russians for beating the Germans in World War II. And everybody knows that JFK, he was a huge war hero. So he gets out there, and of course the military does not like the truth actually coming out. And you have to know what happens back, looking backwards. Eisenhower gets rid of a guy named General Kruse. General Kruse is the guy that comes up with the nuclear bombs, with all the Jewish guys from Europe, the scientists that we stole. Who harvested those scientists?
Is this the Manhattan Project?
Yeah. This is Allen Dulles, the guy that's linked to JFK's death. You said, how does this link to this story at Waterloo? Do you know who sat in on the Treaty of Versailles? Who is tied to it? John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles. How do you like that? You know that they're both Pilgrim Society members. They're both Council of Foreign Relations members.
I've
They're
heard
both
of-
linked to the Rockefeller.
What is the Pilgrim Society? I've not heard of this.
Pilgrim Society was formed by the same guys that come up with Rhodes Scholars. These were people that were assigned after, I think it was 1900, right when Queen Victoria dies, to build relations between Britain and the United States. Turns out these are Americans that are still loyal to the crown.
Gotcha.
So anybody who has CFR at the end of their name, most famous one that I've been going after on social media lately is Callie Means and his dad. They're all linked to the Rockefellers. Why is this important to me and you as a Bitcoiner? Because I don't think I'm going to get an argument from you. The Rockefeller family is part of the Federal Reserve. No question about it. And when you scale it forward, the Rockefeller Foundation plays a huge role in my profession, has ever since the Flexner Report, again, 1911. And then it plays a huge role in the formation of the Fed. It ties energy, ties money, and then eventually where does it go to banking? Why? Because that's where Chase comes from. To bring it more to probably your time frame, his time frame, that's when you have JP Morgan Chase come together. In other words, where does Jamie Dimon come from? Why does Jamie Dimon really hate Bitcoin? Because you need to know this story that I'm telling you, because Jamie Dimon was formed from Sandy Weill. Sandy Weill is from Citigroup. Citigroup is linked to the Council of Foreign Relations, to Rockefeller, to all the brothers that were John D. Rockefeller's sons. These guys were all captains of industry, robber barons, whatever you want to call them, but they were politicians that masterfully played all the politics from 1911, I would say, until probably 1990. All the formation of your young life, but the majority of my life.
Yeah.
So when you think about, when you say, where does ignorance end and where does fraud begin? Obviously, your point of relativity becomes important. Him as a Commonwealth guy, he has a different idea than I do. You're an American like me, but I would be willing to say that I bet you that our common tie isn't, because there's a generational gap between us. But everything that I've told you up until this point is prior to my own life.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself the question as the Bitcoiner, why Jack spend this much time going back to parts of his life? Because it blew up things in my young life that I was taught to be true, that I examined, that no longer were.
So you started at the surface of centralized medicine, basically, followed the rabbit hole, which is probably largely following the money, sounds like. Is that
Correct.
the story?
Correct.
And it takes you through these layers of history and this sequence of cause and effect, political events. So then 1812, Rothschilds take over the Bank of England, and then 1913 we get the Federal Reserve in the United States.
Well, something happens in between there that's important.
Yeah, three
This
failed
was-
attempts, but that is the Rothschilds establishing, at least Rothschilds and Co. There's obviously other owners of the Fed. That's them establishing a toehold in the United States in
Well,
1913.
I'm going to tell you the toehold that's important probably for your history. Like, how do we link now the Danny Jones part that he didn't want to step into, which is the Mossad? This is very important. 1843, this is, remember,
Yeah.
Queen Victoria comes in 37. There's a bunch of Jewish merchants in a place called Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. They're not looked too favorably. There's some anti-Semitism there. They wound up leaving Germany, and where do they come? They come to the United States, the 1840s. What do you know about the 1840s and 1850s in the United States? Pre-Civil War. So who were they loyal to? Were they loyal to the Americans, or were they loyal to the royal family? They were still loyal, even though they were treated badly. And they wanted to make good with Queen Victoria and coming over. So they became all the captains of industry in the 20 states that are, the 13 colonies, however you want to characterize it. And from 1843 all the way up into our Civil War, they were involved in, guess what, psyops? Lincoln's assassination. So realize that these are the family members. They are a partner called what we call B'nai Birth. What did B'nai Birth eventually morph into? ADL, APAC, So when you begin to understand that the families that all form the Federal Reserve are all linked to this same group, you start to go, now it begins to make sense what happened in the 20th century down the road, because these people truly were still loyal to the British Crown. And they never went back. They were always trying to capture a loyal title. You'll find out some of the people that you and I were taught were, I would say, heroes for the United States, specifically FDR. FDR is one of my top 5 worst presidents. Woodrow Wilson by far is the worst. Woodrow Wilson gave the monetary system to these guys, to the guys that came over in the pre-Civil War time. That's where you actually merge the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers.
That's all you need to ultimately take a loyal title back, right? Is control of the monetary system. Because you can just inflate the currency and violate property rights, transfer them to your master away from the
It's amazing to me, though, that Bitcoiners, though, don't understand this history. Why? Because to me, I said to the guys before we started, Bitcoiners are really good about, let's go back and talk about 1971.
Right.
You guys are, because you're young, I'm like sitting there and I'm going, bro, hold my beer. There's a long story that's tied to this, because you need to realize, like, let's bring it to current events. Why is Elizabeth Warren and Sherrod Brown like our mortal enemies? Well, you need to know that they all tie back to this story. Each one of them. If you go back in this tentacle, you'll find out they're all tied to the Rockefellers. They're all tied to the bankers who are tied to this story. And when you really understand Elizabeth Warren's part, she actually is tied to the health side and the banking side, because most of the companies that get broken up in Standard Oil are now based either in New Jersey or in Massachusetts. And where was all the COVID jabs really designed? In Massachusetts.
Wow.
So guess where all her money comes from? Like, the first question we should always ask about Elizabeth Warren, because she's in my top 10 trader list right now in the United States. She makes $300,000 a year. Robert, she's got $400 million in the bank.
Yeah.
You remember what they used to do in ancient Greece? Because I know you like history a little bit. They'd look at how much money you had, and after the next year, they'd look at how much you have in the bank. And if you had too much, it didn't make sense, they killed you.
Yeah.
They didn't put you on trial. They just killed you.
Yeah.
And you want to know something? That's part of when I saw the little trailer that one of my members sent me about you and Luke. I was like, what took us away from that mindset then? And then I'll ask you another question, because we're right now, today's December, what, 11th, 12th? All right. So you'll like this one,
Right.
because I know you learned this history. On Christmas Eve, 1776, do you know that Washington crossed a river to kill the government for what? 3% tax on tea.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here right now, and we're saying, no, we shouldn't talk about the $3.3 trillion that you and Luke talked about. I'm like, bro, what part of the theory of relativity don't you get?
All right. So you're saying we need to be channeling the spirit of the founding fathers. That George Washington was a, what, 6'6", red-headed guy with wooden teeth.
He was a badass.
Crossing the
He's the
Potomac.
ultimate. He's the
Kill
ultimate
someone over a
Bitcoin.
3% tax.
He's the ultimate Bitcoin badass. Why? Because what is he really doing when he's crossing that river, Robert? He's protecting the loyal title of the United States.
Yeah.
We took our sovereignty back. And I'm just going to tell you that I don't believe we should give an inch on this story.
Yeah.
I think we need to hold the fucking criminals in Washington, D.C. to these kind of things. You know, he was, before you came, we got into a pretty fiery discussion about why I'm so fired up about this. I don't believe Bitcoiners really know enough about history to know what we're really fighting for now.
No, we don't. We definitely don't.
We shouldn't give them an inch.
Well,
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.